All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the newest episode of penpodcast.com with your host, Matthew Harms, founder of Pen for Hire NYC, where we offer ghostwriting, coaching, and other writing relating services. And I am joined here today by fellow ghostwriter, Richard Squires. Richard, how are you, sir?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me, Matt.
It is my pleasure. Thank you for being here. And I know people might be wondering, like, oh my goodness, you have another ghostwriter on the show. But Richard and I connected a while back. And even though we are both ghostwriters, we kind of have a very, very different audience, a very different niche client. And I thought it would be great to have him on the call today because he has varied experience and a lot of different insight he can give into a very specialized field of ghostwriting that I've always been interested in. So, Richard, I'm going to turn it over to you for a bit just to tell us a little bit about yourself, and then I'll jump back in.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. My company is called LifeStory, and what I do is I write people's memoirs for them. The majority of people I've come across have had the idea at one point or another of how great it would be to have the story of their life told. Sometimes people think of it, as a movie or even as a book, but the idea of writing your own book, writing your own memoir or autobiography is a tall task. A lot of people do sit down and they start trying to write, but they very often eventually learn that it's not so easy. It's just a lot of labor to write, and there's a lot to know and learn, and it's often a learning curve. So when I meet people and I tell them I write people's memoirs for them, I make it very easy. All they have to do is talk to me. I interview them, I record it, I transcribe it, and then I edit their words and I incorporate pictures. And just to show you, here's an example of a book that I did not too long ago. And this is Joe. I interviewed Joe, transcribed his words, included, put in some pictures, and basically worked with his words and edited them into the most engaging narrative that they could be, to make it mostly chronological, because people don't speak chronologically. People also repeat themselves a lot. So I had to take out the redundancy and just do work my editing magic and with my heart, and the love that I bring to it, and create their memoir for them. And the memoir makes a legacy that lasts for generations to come, for forever. So he has great grandchildren, and that when they're old enough, they'll be able to read the book, and then their children will be able to read it. And so that's very exciting to me. I got into it. I got the idea from my grandfather. My grandfather was a World War II vet. He flew fighter planes in the Philippines, in the Pacific Theater. And he told me stories about it all the time. And he showed me he had scars. He had all kinds of adventures. He had to eject from the plane a couple times.
Times?
Yeah, 2 times, I believe. And because what they used to, the enemy used to shoot flak. These I guess they were called flak. They were these projectiles that would go up into the air and then explode. And the little pieces of shrapnel were called flak, and they would destroy the planes that the pilots were in. And one of the stories is that the flak basically ripped off like the floor of the airplane that my grandfather was flying, and killed his co-pilot. It hit his co-pilot in the head and went into my grandfather's leg. And my grandfather had to bail out, parachute down, wait in the Pacific Ocean, surrounded by sharks, holding on to his floating radio, which they called Fannie Mae, after the famous beautiful actress at the time. And they were surrounded by sharks, and the blood was a problem. It would attract the sharks, and he eventually got picked up. And that's just one of the stories. And he had the scar in his leg, and he asked me to write his life story for him. So I was getting my master's of fine arts at the time, and it occurred to me that the best way to do it, the most kind of efficient way to do it, would be just to interview him and record it and edit his words, rather than doing like a kind of a standard ghostwriting thing where you do the interviews and take a lot of notes and then write the prose from scratch. And that's what I did, and that's how my company was born.
So was your grandfather was your first one?
He was my first one.
That's awesome. And I mean, just hearing that story, I can see the power behind something like that, because I'm sure there's other people like myself. I'm kind of like a World War II buff, especially the history behind it. And I'm also a shark buff. So what you just said about, being in the ocean, a lot of people don't realize, more humans than I think ever in history were attacked by sharks during the Pacific theater of World War II, due to all of the Navy and Air Force servicemen who were stranded in the ocean after being shot down or their ships torpedoed. And it was just like a massive feeding frenzy. So the fact that you got to hear that like firsthand account of being there, I'm sure had to be incredible. I've got just chills thinking about it.
It's incredible. It was awesome. It was, I love it. I've always loved, the story. I was familiar with it. My grandfather was always telling it to me, but the fact that now we have it in a book, and my grandfather, he actually passed away. The book was printed while my grandfather was dying.
Oh my goodness.
Because he'd had a stroke, and we were visiting him in the hospital, and he was 90. I think he was 90, either 92 or 94. And to me that, and it was, he had a wonderful long life, and we have good longevity in my family, which is wonderful. But yeah, it's really special. It's really special. But it's funny that you say that, because I always associate our irrational fear of sharks with, of course, the movie Jaws. But you're actually putting it in context now of World War II, where it was a feeding frenzy. So there's another source of our fear of sharks.
And go figure, that's not something they glorify or they really show in the movies, right? When you see a war movie, there's never any focus, or if they're in the water, it's like placid and calm. They're focusing on the war and not the underlying threat that really killed so many service members.
Amazing.
So after you did that for your grandfather, was it like a light bulb went off and you were like, I've got to keep doing this? Or had you originally had the thought in your head and that just solidified it?
Well, I've always wanted to be a storyteller, and I majored in literature in undergrad, and I minored in film, and I took a film production course, a couple courses, and I wanted to be a filmmaker. And when I graduated from college, I worked in the film industry for a little more than a year. I worked on a Woody Allen movie, a Merchant Ivory movie, and a couple other things, a Paramount pilot. So I wanted to get into storytelling. And then I got out of the film industry because there was a writer's strike and there was no work to have. And then I was a waiter in New York for a little bit. And then there was 9/11 and I ended up moving home. And then I went for a master's degree in it was literature with a concentration in creative writing, right? And then after that, I was just, working as a writer in corporate mostly. I worked for a museum in marketing, and then I was doing pharmaceutical communications, and that wasn't really like soul satisfying. And the whole time I'm thinking to myself, how can I, make a living doing something that I enjoy doing, what I want to do? And then I ended up, it was, I deciding to go back for an MFA, Master of Fine Arts degree, while I was working for Pfizer. And when I was getting my master's degree is when my grandfather asked me to write his life story. And it was a light bulb. It was. I was working for, and then I was doing it sort of part-time in addition, because I had to kind of rev up and get some books under my belt so I was doing corporate communications for Merck, while I did the next like 3 or 4 projects.
Okay.
Concurrently. And then I stopped working for Merck and I jumped into LifeStory full time in about, it's 2020 now, it was probably like 2017.
Okay. And how many clients did you have under your belt in order to make that feasible to leave, a job with a company like Merck and jump into doing this? Because I know firsthand, and I'm sure there's other writers listening to this who have 1, 2, 3 or 4 jobs that they're doing just to support their ability to come home and write instead of sleeping, because it comes with it's par for the course. It comes with the territory. So how many projects did you have under your belt before you finally felt confident enough where you're like, you know what, I'm good enough at this. I'm going to succeed. I don't need that corporate paycheck anymore.
When I made the change, I probably had 7 books under my belt.
Okay.
But I would not say I did it with total confidence.
I don't think we could ever say we do anything with total confidence.
Right.
But
Right.
enough confidence to say, I think I've got this.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, it felt like inevitable. It just felt like the way to go. You know, if I was going to make it, it felt like a change had to be made, and that was the change I was going to make. And I made the choice to, you know, take that leap and dedicate myself to it, and that was the choice I was making, no matter what happened.
Got it. Yeah, no, I trust me. I know the feeling. As you know, I had a very similar experience. So how many have you done now? You had 7 when you finally decided to jump in full time. How many are you
Yeah.
up to in total?
25.
25.
Yeah.
How long does it take you approximately per biography?
I'm trying to make it faster. They take between 6 and 12 months, but
Okay.
you know, I'm not doing one at a time. I'm juggling a number of projects at a time. Yeah.
Have you ever had someone approach you and mention that they were thinking of writing their own, or has it always been someone who is just like, help me take this idea out of my head and write it for me?
So I'm really flexible and basically open to anything that we can conceive. You know, if we can imagine that it can be a reality, we can do it. So, you know, sort of the classic life story memoir is I interview them and make their book. Some people come to me with material they've already written. I can incorporate that. I can edit it. You know, I can supplement that material with interviews, integrate it all, edit it so that it has a seamless voice. I can also just edit something that they wrote. And if someone, you know, has something that they're very happy with that's written, like I have one client, Lois, who wrote her own memoir, but she needed it to be formatted, and she wanted all the pictures to be put in, and for me to create the cover and just publish it, produce it. So it was an actual, real physical book.
All right.
And I did that for her, and I put it on Amazon for her. So yeah, and I've done other, you know, whatever can be conceived. So like I have one book I did. I'll show you for a couple, you know, and I interviewed both of them and I integrated their voices. And this wasn't about their entire lives. It was about their years from 1965 to 1980, adventures abroad in the Foreign Service. Really, really interesting. So that's like just kind of a more concentrated theme there. And then I have another book I did. I've done a couple books where they were tributes to people who have passed. And so I didn't interview those people. I interviewed their family. And with one book, this one, I interviewed 14 people.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I integrated their voices. So
each kind of excerpt was spoken from the point of view of the person that you got that story or insight from.
yes. And what I love about it is that a lot of people, you know how certain stories become lore in family, right? So I interviewed a number of his grandchildren and just, you know, and his sons-in-law and his daughters and his friends. And a lot of the stories are repeated by different people. So it's not like it's broken up where each person has their own chapter. I integrated the voices according to the content. And it almost becomes a little bit like a discussion, or, you know, same people telling the same story, but with their own details and their own points of view.
Got it. Now,
Yeah.
I mean, for anyone listening, just to understand how difficult that actually is, it's hard enough to write in someone else's voice, let alone 14 other people's voices in the same book. Right? 14 books, 14 voices, okay, because you could tailor it and no one's reading the stories back to back. That takes a degree of talent. So I don't want to assume that was your most difficult endeavor, but I will let you tell us, of all the biographies you've written, what do you find to be the most challenging obstacle to overcome in getting a story on paper?
I can tell you that the editing takes time. It's laborious. People, again, they will repeat themselves. You know, a lot of my clients are seniors, and they have varying degrees of sharpness and normal cognitive decline, depending on how old they are. Some of my clients are in their 90s. In fact, I did this Holocaust anthology where I interviewed 11 Holocaust survivors. Before the book was printed, 2 of them passed away. One of them was 99.
Oh,
I think
wow.
the other was 98. So they, they were really up there in age. So sometimes I come back, I'll interview them, because the interviews go over multiple sessions depending on how many hours I'm interviewing them for. And I'll come back and they don't remember what they told me, and sometimes they're repeating themselves. But I don't, and sometimes I stop them and I say, let's just move on because we talked about this before. But what happens when someone tells a story for the second time is that more details come out that weren't mentioned the first time. And I don't want to lose anything. I want to keep everything that's good. And so I print out both scenes, both times that they told that scene, and I put them next to each other and I take my pen to it, and I do the old, take the pen to the paper and do the big time micro editing. And it just takes time. I love doing it, but I don't lose any of the good details, and I merge those.
Have you ever run into instances where maybe that same story repeats and some of the details are different and you have to go back for clarification and figure out which version of events was closer to reality?
That happens, but not in any major way. It's usually details, but it's interesting. People very often, they're thinking one thing, they mean to say something, and something else comes out. Yep. And especially for older people, they can say the wrong year, they can say the wrong person.
Absolutely. And something that I've kind of been thinking of just since we started talking, I know you have or for the most part, a fairly defined market of who you do these projects for. If you were to give advice to anyone who's thinking of doing a memoir or a biography at some point, would it be advisable to maybe start a project like this at a younger age and then go back and add details later on in life? And by younger age, I don't mean like, our age, but maybe 65, 70, when there's still some more cognitive ability, and then kind of fill in the later years afterwards so they have a stronger working template? Or is that not something that people usually think about until they get much further on in age?
If someone really wants to have their book, the answer is that the more you write and the sooner you write, the better. Definitely. And that you can always go back and change things or edit or add to. The hardest thing about writing in general is that people don't loosen up. Right? You need to just loosen up, let it fly, don't worry about it. Don't be your internal editor at the same time that you're writing. That's the big thing, is you have to separate the writer from the editor. And if someone wants to get something down, but they you just let the fingers fly.
Just let the fingers.
Yeah.
And do you find, for the most part, the folks that you interview are very forthcoming with everything? Or is there ever a point where you kind of have to develop a technique to coax some of the information and get it flowing?
Most people are forthcoming. I have had, sometimes the clients are the storytellers themselves. They hired me to write their book. Probably more than half the time, the clients are the children of, or even the grandchildren of, who are doing this to celebrate their elders, whether a parent or grandparent, and to celebrate their lives and to do this as a gift. I had one case where the client told me that his father is not very forthcoming, and it was a very difficult interview. I had to, luckily I had a whole list of questions I could refer to when I didn't know what else to ask. But there are techniques. You want to ask open-ended questions and sort of prompt them. And I find I get very excited, and one of the big things that I bring to it that maybe is different from other people is just kind of my level of excitement and heart and sort of camaraderie that I develop with my clients, and friendship, really. And I get really involved, and I create a very warm and open and easygoing environment where it's all good, and you don't have to worry about what you say because it's all going to be edited later and you're going to be able to review it. Just let's just get into it. And so I'm very encouraging that way. And the other thing is that I know that good reading and good writing really is sensory. You need your sensory details, right? So people may speak with generalities a lot. This was so wonderful, this was so great. Okay, but so I try to ask questions that are going to bring out sometimes very specific questions, like people talk about their first car. Okay, yeah, first car? What was the make of it? What was the color? You know, what was the inside, the outside? How did it smell? You know, things like
How
that.
did you feel the first time you stepped on the gas?
Yeah, exactly. How did that sound? Did it purr like a kitten? You know, to give me enough details to work with so that I can edit it into something that makes for the most engaging reading that it can be.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because no one wants to read the C spot run. First I went to high school, and then we went to prom, and
Right.
that's just not
Let's slow down here, you know?
right. Well, factually and chronologically correct, who wants to read it, right?
Yeah.
I want to know all about what happened in those moments, kind of just like you're reading a fiction, right? A biography should be as engaging as a fiction novel.
It should be. It should be. There's a difference between like a piece of creative nonfiction where you will take liberties with the facts in order to more maybe directly and deliberately like express the truth. You know, if you read like a commercial memoir, a piece of creative nonfiction, like say The Glass Castle, something like that, or others, or there's Alana Ferrante's my Brilliant Best Friend, I think it's called, My Brilliant Friend. These are very commercial and they're written like fiction, and you know that there are liberties taken to make it more engaging, so that to give it these elements of fiction to increase the whatever tension, dramatic tension, and kind of hit home on themes more, and all that kind of stuff. It's different than the life stories that I do for my clients, because I'm working with the information that they give me, and I feel that I can't take certain liberties, because then I'm going to be inventing things, and they're going to read it and say, well, this isn't exactly how it happened. You know, so it has a different quality. The quality is more that it's them, and it's their essence that I'm capturing, and it's their voice, so that when and it's not for a world audience. It's not intended for a world audience. It's intended for their family and their friends and the people who know them. And when they read it, they're like, oh my God, that is Grandpa. That is Grandma. These are the stories he and she told me. And I hear the voice. And like, this is totally his or her essence that Richard has captured.
Yeah, it's completely different than like a historical fiction where you can take liberties with either some of the history or some of the fiction, and how you decide to leverage that, because this is, for most of historical fiction, I mean, just off the top of my head, like we know supposedly Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. You're probably going to want to keep that date static, but everything else that may have happened is loosely interpreted by whatever accounts that we have. And there's no one still alive who can turn around and say, well, you got that wrong.
But even commercial nonfiction takes liberties. You know, it'll, even if you, more so if you see like a nonfiction film.
True, yeah.
Scenes are, maybe the sequences is changed, or for film purposes, they'll conflate characters just because they don't want it to be too unwieldy. But sometimes they have to make a character who maybe was a little bit evil, even more evil, to raise the tension and the conflict. And it's the same with writing, with nonfiction creative writing. Mm-hmm. Liberties are taken, right, to give the reader that kind of commercial experience.
Right. Whereas with an autobiography, the only embellishment or conflation should be from the actual person telling the story.
It's true. I don't do that.
Right. If they want to, because again, you don't know what the story was. So if they want to like blow it up, then by all means, it's their story. And if that's how it felt to them, that's delivering that message in a way that the reader can understand it. But you are not at liberty to say this story would sound so much better if we did it this way.
They are welcome to tell it that way if they want to, and if they have that sort of mind frame, and then I'll create that book for them. But yeah, but with these life story memoirs, I'm working with the stories that they're telling me.
Got it. So now I want to transition a little bit, because you said you also write fiction.
Yes.
So can you give us some insight? Like, have you published anything fiction, finished anything fiction, and how do you switch gears between everything we just said that you can't do when you're writing your nonfiction biography client's work, and all of the things you need to do when you're writing your actual own creative fiction?
So fiction is my passion. I love writing fiction. I've published 5 short stories. I
Okay.
have some novel drafts. I have many other short stories, all unpublished. Working on my fiction is much harder than working on other people's stories, and it's very different because because I'm and a lot of my fiction is sort of autobiographical fiction. It's which one could say. I mean, I have some stories that are not autobiographical. They're like, they take place during different wars, or they're completely made up. But I have other stories that are based on some of my own experiences and pull very directly from them.
Okay.
But and I'm pulling a lot of things that I find memorable from my life, but sort of arranging them into an arrangement that's completely fictional.
And is it surrounded by a protagonist that is based on yourself, but not like a representation, a character created to relive some of those events on your behalf?
It is. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the main character in this collection that I'm working on, it's a collection of, it's like a linked collection of stories based on my experiences through in high school. And the main character is based on me,
The different name, everything's changed to protect the innocent.
Exactly. A different name. But, I had a good group of friends, and we had some very interesting times, and all those names are changed, and all the characters are sort of different, but inspired by. But I really love language, and so it's a major difference in writing the fiction is that I bring, I try to bring a kind of poetry to my prose.
Okay.
And I'm always thinking to myself, how can you up the ante? How can you raise the stakes? How can you make the conflict more dramatic? How can you treat your protagonist a little bit, not to treat him badly, but put him in a situation that makes him sweat a little bit more. So it's different. It's different than writing the memoirs, the life story memoirs, which is, where I'm working with the words that are given to me. And with that, I think of it as like, I end up with all these puzzle pieces, and I have to arrange those puzzle pieces into a puzzle. But with my fiction writing, it's I have puzzle pieces, but I can mold each little puzzle piece before I even arrange it into a picture. It's more molding, I have more freedom.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's less, you don't have to conform quite as much. You can take that creative license, or because it's your own story. So you can kind of make things a little more exaggerated for effect. You could rein in some things that maybe you're not comfortable saying, whereas that defeats the purpose generally of the memoir.
It's true. And it makes it that's one of the things that makes writing my fiction more difficult, is that, I have a real roadmap with the life story memoirs.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's more just kind of labor. It takes time. It's a lot of detailed work.
So are you saying that it's easier to write someone else's biography than it would be for you to sit down and try to write your own?
Yeah. And it would be easier to write someone else's even fictional story. It's easier to write someone else's anything than it is to write my own pretty much anything.
Interesting. So I totally understand the biography part, right? Because I started kind of a fictionalized narration of my life events a few years ago. It's sitting completely unfinished. I'm about 20 pages in, and there's just something about writing about things that have happened to you, even if you're fictionalizing it, where it's just not easy sometimes to come to terms with it or process, like, wow, did that really happen? Or I like the emotional attachment of, I missed that, or, oh my goodness, like now I'm 25 years older. What if I did this differently? But you find it's easier to write someone else's complete fiction as well?
I think so, because the problem is the internal editor getting in the way. It's interesting because I've taught, I teach writing. I taught at the college level. I was a high school English teacher for a time, and I've been tutoring ever since, like, almost 20 years. I tutor language arts. I work with someone and, tutor language arts, SAT, ACT prep, help people with their college essays, school support, all kinds of writing. So I'm a writing teacher also. And I know how to preach writing. amazingly, practicing what I preach. And I know it's not easy for my students to practice what I preach, and it's not that easy for me to practice what I preach, because writing's not that easy, and that's why I was saying, like, going back to like loosening up and just like letting it flow. I mean, you really have to separate your writer from your editor, and it's not easy to do that. And I find that, like, the better I become at writing, or like the more knowledgeable I become about writing, the harder it actually is, because I see the pitfalls I'm falling into every step of the way. And I need to just accept it and know that I'm going to come back later and address them. But you kind of want to, like, writing, again, it's a lot of labor, and you kind of want to, like, I'm always tempted to try to save myself labor. But the truth is, you really got to forget about it, dump it out, and go back and deal with it later.
Yes. And, one of the things I encounter coaching other writers in their own process is kind of that, I don't want to say hypocritical, but do as I say, not as I do. Because I know exactly what you need to do to get past this, or, how this should look. But then if you read, you're going to be like, well, Matt, you didn't do that. Right. But I know I didn't do that, and I did it for a reason. And that's kind of like, that's beyond the scope of what we're talking about right here. Right? Like, let's get past this hurdle. And then you got to learn how to ride a bike the right way before you can start doing all the tricks and ride it the wrong way. So that's hurdle one. And hurdle two is that internal editor. I've learned I can't edit my own stuff, right? I've had to literally accept that. That's why I write by hand a lot of times, because when I start typing and I see the red squiggly line, I completely lose my train of thought. I have to go back. I have to fix it in the moment. And now the whole concept that I thought was going to flow out of me for the next hour is gone. It's like vanished into the ether because I was correcting the misspelling on a 4-letter word. So when I write by hand, it's irrelevant. It doesn't matter, because I'm not, my hand just keeps going. It doubles my process time because now I have to retype it. But in the long run, I feel more comfortable doing that and not losing the thought as I do to trying to write, and my internal editor or internal developmental editor stepping in and going, that doesn't make sense, or that's wrong, you got to fix that.
It's amazing. It is amazing. That editor, you just got to shut that editor down. But it's like, even if you get so good at riding a bike that you can teach someone else how to ride a bike and avoid mistakes, doesn't mean you're still going to avoid those mistakes. Because, like, even writing teachers are writing students. We're all writing students, right? And we all, and people will say, it's like with every new project, every blank page, it's like you're starting fresh. You're writing a new project, you're a student again. You have to learn how to become the writer who can write that project.
Yeah, and I think that's true even up to like the top authors, bestsellers. We're all constantly learning from each other, learning from our last work. Again, sometimes the best learning comes from feedback and reviews. You may think you nailed something, and then you read 2 or 3 reviews that kind of point out the same thing that you may have missed, or something you did that people didn't like. And really, it would be foolish and a little too much pride to say, well, they don't know what they're talking about. If more than one person said something or felt the same way, we're almost kind of duty bound to address it if we have any pride in our work, or want it to become more appealing and more cohesive the next time around.
Yeah, I believe so. For my MFA program, I have a cohort of writers. So there's some of my best friends. There's 10 of us, and we were getting together. My program was up in Maine. It was University of Southern Maine, and every summer we were renting a house and having a big, like, 5-day or 7-day writing workshop up there, where we would have a workshop from whatever 9 to 12 in the morning every day, and then have the rest of our days and get writing done. And it was great, as well as live together and cook together and go on hikes and do all this great stuff. I wasn't able to go last year because the kids, I got 2 kids, and then this year it didn't happen. But I love the workshop. I love getting feedback. I feel my job when I'm writing a story, and also just having the workshop, really, like, gives me a deadline to get a draft finished and get it in. So that's always very helpful. But, I know that they're going to have really good things to say. My job is to work on my story as much as I can, to work out all the kinks that I'm aware of, and to hand it to them in a form where I see pretty much nothing wrong with it. Or I might have like a sense that there is something wrong with it, but I'm not sure what it is, or I'm not sure how to address it. And it bothers me when someone turns in a story where they know there's something wrong with it and they should have fixed that, because they didn't need me to tell them that. But when I get to the story to the point where I don't see anything that I can do, and I hand it to them, and then I get the feedback, and then I know I'm at a high level. And so like, as I become a better writer, I'm able to get further, closer to the finishing point. And there really is no finishing point, right? At some point you just stop, but you get closer to it. It's like a half-life, right? Like, you know, you'll never reach it,
Right.
but you get closer to it. And I guess you know, and that makes me feel really happy, is that like with each next story that I submit to them, I always feel like I'm getting better and better and stronger and stronger. And of course, I'm always going to get feedback that's useful.
Right. Right. Yeah. Have you ever been at a point where, maybe it's just me, I'm exceptionally critical and difficult on myself, where I've given something to someone to read, like a finished draft of a novel, and I've sworn that there were plot holes, or there was something that they were going to be able to pick apart, and then I'd sit there and wait, and like 3 or 4, everyone like, no, I don't know what you're talking about, and I would try to point it out to them, like, are you sure? Like, this made sense to you? And have you ever done that, or you're always like super confident that there's nothing they're going to find, or at least nothing that you can think of?
Sometimes I leave things to see if they'll be noticed, because
Okay.
I'm not sure, because there's that fine line of being subtle, right? Like, you don't want to be too obvious, but you don't want to make it too opaque where they're
Yes.
not going to pick up on it, right? And that's a very difficult line. And people like, I don't know, maybe the minimalists, like say Hemingway and Carver, it's like they accomplished so much with so little. It's the iceberg method, right? Where the words only take up 10%. They only show 10% of the picture, but when you read them, there's so much subtext that you feel the whole picture. And that I lose, you know, when I'm working with a story and just going over and over and getting lost in the words and looking at it so closely, it can be very easy to lose perspective of that level of the writing, and I rely on other readers for that.
Awesome. Yeah. And you just put that in context for me, that maybe it's not the criticalness. It is when you're trying to develop a very engaging and subtle, nuance within the story, that's probably where I question myself the most, and most other readers will as well. Most of the writers will as well. Did I give too much away, or did I make it so subtle that no one was able to connect that dot? And now it just makes no sense, and the storyline kind of falls flat.
Totally. And that's a very magical level, because, and sometimes it's just a word, you know, or a phrase. It's just, you know, or just
one word could give,
like a motif.
That one word gives everything away, or the absence of that one word leaves everything completely gray, and people were like, what did he mean?
Right. Or it just rings that bell. Ding,
yep.
That word. It's a magical thing. And it's almost like like it's, you can't even, there's not even a science to it necessarily. A lot of it's just trial and error, I suppose. But like, but I feel that, when I'm working with the trial and error, like on my own, it's like I only have so many goes before rounds before I am out of it, and like I can't tell anymore.
Right. You've changed it so many times that you now know you don't know where to get off the merry-go-round.
Exactly. Now I'm dizzy and like I can't tell, and I've lost the sense of taste.
You're handing it over to someone else nauseous, like, please point me in the right direction.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And my favorite fiction to write is thrillers. So that's usually that thread. I do like fantasy as well, and some other, like my nonfiction, that's never an issue. It's just, then is it concise? But anything that has an element of a whodunit, or, an underlying theme, you want to be conscious of that and not get so emotionally invested that you can't take a step back and see the forest for the trees.
Totally. I'm a big fan of, I don't read like a lot of, like commercial thriller type stuff, but I love noir. Love noir. Which is, one could say, is like a literary type of, some of it is like literary thriller, I suppose, like Raymond Chandler and, things like that. And then I'm The Big Sleep and Lady in the Lake and things like that. And I love those movies, and Dashiell Hammett. They're very smart, and they really or like a movie like Chinatown, you know, the Roman Polanski film with Jack Nicholson. They're very smart in that they capture the right balance between giving enough information so that in the end it makes sense, yet being you really have to think back on it, like what just happened, because the writer is and the writer and the detective are smarter than the reader, you know, so that the reader doesn't see it coming in advance. You know, the writer and the writer is a step ahead, right? But not so far ahead that you lose the reader, but just far enough ahead that you're luring them with the carrot.
Exactly, dangling the carrot.
Yeah, it's amazing. And then there's always like the twist that you didn't see coming, or hopefully you didn't see it coming, yet in hindsight it makes total sense. But sometimes, you know, after these movies, like after Chinatown or after these Raymond Chandler books, you really have to, you're like, what just happened? You know, and you actually really have to think about it. And then it makes sense, but it's not that easy. It's tough.
You know, when you read a book, you're like, oh, that was so well done. I mean, I'm gonna start writing, and I'm gonna do something similar. And then you realize, between character development, between not being too linear, you know, all of the different moving pieces that come into play, it's nowhere near as simple as it sounds. Because it's that fine line, right? You could definitely, I find I can make the greatest mystery ever, but I may lose people by page 20 and they're not going to want to read any further, or you make it too obvious. It's that sweet spot that is such an art form.
Yeah, and it's not just about the story, right? It's about the prose and the style in which you tell it, you know,
Yep.
the tone and how you organize the story, and you know, all of that. And I love, sometimes when I'm doing my life story memoirs, there will be opportunities to bring that kind of thing into play, you know, where like something happens and the you know, the storyteller, my client, you know, doesn't understand the significance of it, or even like the logistics of it until later on. And so you kind of plant that, and you plant that question, and that's a way to bring a sort of creative technique to my life story memoir that builds momentum. And so when there's an opportunity like that, I take advantage of it. It's not always there.
Thank you for sharing that. I mean, that's a helpful hint for any writers out there listening, especially anyone who wants to get into biographies. Even though some things are more set in stone than others, there is always the possibility of an opportunity arising where you're able to take a little bit of liberty like that and really latch onto something and run with it if it fits in the moment.
And there's also just like the cause and effect idea, and our lives are like cause and effect. I mean, that's what history is, right? And that's what time is, cause and effect. So when I interview somebody like this guy here, Lionel, he was a mega businessman. He basically he owned Shoetown. Are you familiar?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was, I remember there was a Shoetown location in Short Hills where I grew up on Morris Ave. And he had, I always forget if it was 300 or 450 locations that he started from scratch. He started with one location, and he became this amazingly successful guy and kind of like a minor celebrity in New Jersey. Like if you talk to older people in New Jersey, they heard of him. And so my thought was like, what is the childhood that someone has? And what are the parents that someone has? And what is the youth that someone has that makes them into this kind of person who becomes a businessman? And so it's almost like this thesis that's, or like, just like a central through line, how did this guy become who he was?
Have you uncovered any definable link between the successful or super successful people you've done biographies on, like a common thread that they all tend to share that maybe contributed to that success, or is it as varied as the lives they led?
I would say it's varied. I wouldn't say that I came up with an answer to that. This guy was in the Marines, and his father was not supportive of him. His father was in the shoe business, but had a very different model. Lionel created his own model, which is like the pay less model, which is where he was the first guy. He invented this, where he put the shoes out on the racks, and you could go in and you could look at all the shoes and pick out the one that's your size and try them on. He invented that because the way it used to be is you would pick out the single shoe that was out there that you thought you liked and you would like to try it on. The guy measured your foot and he went into the back to get the shoe and brought it to you. Lionel invented this where all the shoes were out and people ended up leaving with like more than one pair. And it was just, and then he didn't have to like have as many employees who were going in the back to like give you personal service. You could just do it, hang out, take your time, try on all the shoes you wanted. Anyway, his father, who was in the shoe business, did not believe in Lionel's idea. And Lionel never forgot that and went off and he did it on his own. And then I'm just thinking of this other really successful guy, Victor, who became an amazingly successful doctor, gastroenterologist, who had a very interesting life. He was in the military service, and his service was as a federal penitentiary doctor at he ended up at Leavenworth, and he met Machine Gun Kelly, and they became like friendly. And he told me the story about Machine Gun Kelly, about how Machine Gun Kelly was really a gentle guy, and it was his wife who was the ambitious one. But Machine Gun Kelly somehow became this like public enemy #1 pop culture figure, where you see him. Machine Gun Kelly never held a gun, but and then I discovered this James Taylor song called Machine Gun Kelly, where it sings all about that, how it was his woman. Don't let your woman bring you down. Anyway, Victor became a really successful gastroenterologist. One of the most innovative guys in like the country, using new well-known. He was using new technology and gadgets, little cameras that he was putting through people with little burning devices to cauteroize like ulcers and things like that. And just compare, his mom was unbelievably supportive of him and would tell him things like just study, just try your best, would give him his study time and his space. Don't worry about it, your grades, just know that you prepared your best. And he ended up getting the award. It was called the Robertson Prize for being the top student in all of Brooklyn when he graduated high school in, I don't remember what year, maybe 1950 or something like that.
That's incredible.
It is incredible. And so it was a different parenting style that they had. That's kind of a long story of saying,
that's good to know, and that's refreshing, inspirational, that there's not a one size fits all background or model for being successful. It's kind of, I guess, how we personally interpret the events around us. So Richard, we're about to be out of time for the day. Where can people find out more about you, LifeStory? I'll post all of your information at the bottom of the video as well. But as they're waiting for me to get this up, if they're listening on penpodcast.com, where can they find you and learn more about what you do if they have any interest in getting a biography done?
That's great. Thank you. So LifeStory, you can see my website at www.lifestorymemoir.com. You can email me at richard@lifestorymemoir.com. You can call me 973-903-1487. I would love to hear from you. I'm happy to chat. There's no pressure to sign up to do a project. I talk to a lot of people who want to inquire, and I love talking about it. I love learning about people's stories, and I'm just, it's a no-fee consultation. Give me a call, give me an email. We will chat. And people are always want to know price. Every project is unique. Every price is different. It really depends on the scope of the story. Once we talk, whether over Zoom or phone, talk for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, I get a sense of the story and what needs to be done to create the right story for what you envision, or for what needs to be done to actually tell that story, how many hours of interview, et cetera. Then I can put together a proposal and give you a price. Fantastic. Richard, thank you so much for everyone listening on penpodcast.com. You've just been listening to Richard Squires from LifeStory, here with your host, Matthew Harms, founder of Pen for Hire NYC. Please check Richard out for all your biography needs. Any other coaching, ghostwriting, writing services, you can visit penforhirenyc.com. We greatly appreciate you listening, subscribing to the YouTube channel, listening on penpodcast.com, and we will catch you on the next one. Richard, thank you again. Thanks so much for having me. Thanks, everybody. Take care. My pleasure. Thank you.